global flood sorts everything from fish up to the land-dwelling creatures, and the fossil record it sorts it's just one column of geologic strata. And then when the water runs off, much of that strata is removed by erosion. So in places like this, we're deep in the geologic column here around the Carboniferous era, because all of the strata that used to be on top of this was removed right after the flood. Right after a global flood, all you would have in this area basically is rocks like that. There wouldn't be any topsoil on them. In many places in the world, this would be the case until, again, the ice caps would melt, and then they would bring an increase of mud by the transportation of water into many areas. And the topsoil was then introduced after the ice caps and the North and South poles began to retreat rapidly, causing an increase in the sea levels, and then a lot of the dirt and rock from the high places are carried into low places like these. That's how we get topsoil. But it's beneficial for ancient, cultures that live right after the flood. The dispersion from the Tower of Babel to live near areas that are close to the, the ocean or bodies of water, near deltas where water has naturally accumulated by the it's basically a runoff point where rivers flow into a large body of water, and with that they carry a large amount of mud, basically, that's very fertile, and so it builds up in that region, and then you can use that for farming. That would be ideal for ancient cultures, because a lot of land right after the flood is going to be bare, and it's not going to have topsoil until it's carried from the high places, the high mountains. The water during the flood that covered this region right here was then rapidly removed. So you see rocks like this, they were a part of a layer of strata, and then they were buckled, uplifted and turned over. And so we see this right here. You see the layers of strata. So at the time of the flood, all the water that we see today on the earth was once under the crust of the earth. It came shooting to the surface, carrying with it, a lot of mud and rock, and putting it on the surface. And then also the 40 days and 40 nights of rain is scouring the pre-flood mountains and washing all of that dirt and rock into the ocean. And because the tidal waves have no continents to interrupt them, you have harmonic tides that are about 300 foot tall consecutively over the course of around 6 months. And this hydrologic sorting or tidal pumping with the process of liquefaction, which allows heavier, denser minerals or particles to sink, and then the lighter ones will rise. This will establish the earth into geologic strata. Now, as we discussed, at the time after the flood, when the mountains rise, then you have all of that water rushing off. So all the layers of strata that used to be above this area, covering this area, was rapidly removed. So you see the staircase formation of the strata. It climbs and climbs and keeps climbing. Well, this whole area, including all that water, didn't used to be there. This whole area was just covered in dirt. See more of the strata here. Probably limestone, like the rest of the stuff in Oklahoma, or at least in Rogers County. There's even a town called Limestone in it, where they take limestone out of the ground and make roads with it, because it has a major cementing agent. And so this staircase of strata goes up. And the strata that used to be covering this entire region was removed approximately 4,500 years ago. So as you can see, we're in a very high point. The strata used to be stacked up way higher than this. So what we're looking at here is strata that was deposited rapidly by a global flood, or millions of years of ocean floors rising and falling and bringing more material and then stacking it up over millions of years. They say that the lower that you go into the strata, the farther back in time that you are. And so, as I said earlier, on the geologic column, this strata would be around the Carboniferous era. Now, about 1,000 years after the flood, more water will actually flood into this region coming down from high places because of the glacial retreat of the ice that's now in the North and South Poles. It would have covered much more of the land coming clear down to Kansas City, Missouri. And then around 1,000 years after the flood, it rapidly retreats, and so rising the sea levels and causing even more erosion to take place in this area. Another thing, the earth was already made with landforms like this. These landscapes, lakes existed, except, in smaller oceans before the flood. This is part of God's creation originally. Layers of geologic strata existed before the flood. These are just the result of the flood. It resorted the layers of strata that were already there before the flood. Even since the retreat of the glaciers, there's probably been several generations of trees that have grown in this area, basically just like this. They've grown, died, and then, the insects and stuff do their part when they become mats of dead vegetation, and then other trees grow in their place, and just this cycle continues. Trees take a lot of nutrients out of the ground and water, so those trees have to live, grow up, die, and then new trees can form. These are oldest tree in Oklahoma I know of is probably no more than 400 years old, so all these less than 200 to 300 years old, including this massive tree right here. But everything that you see here is in fact native to about 3,500 years. It basically looks the same now as it did then, except for the man-made features. The lake is man-made, so it's been virtually bare since the flood and gradually increased in soil and mud for the last 3,500 years until they filled it in with a lake. So again, right after the flood, a lot less trees, a lot less topsoil, until the ice caps begin to retreat, and then all that topsoil is flooded into this region. Trees begin to grow, die, grow again in the area. It's been happening for a few thousand years now. I'd say that this glacial retreat happened 10,000 years ago, approximately. And according to the Bible, it brings it to more like 3,500 years ago. So let's give a summary of the geologic formation of Oklahoma, and specifically Collinsville, Oklahoma. You have 40 days and 40 nights of rain, which establishes each layer of the column and all the fossils. And then the formation of the major mountain ranges causes massive erosion in most places, from the topmost layers all the way down to the Carboniferous, like in Collinsville, Oklahoma. And then a post-flood glacial retreat happens about 1,000 years after the flood, so 3,500 years ago. Since that time, over the course of that time, topsoil has been gradually introduced. So right now we're standing actually on top of all that rock, which is down that way. The lake is that way, so that's where we were. And here we're standing on that rock. Mountains before the flood a lot smaller than today. Major mountains and all the geologic strata was actually formed as a result of the global flood. And so after the flood, what causes the flood to stop is actually the formation of the major mountains. And so you have the land basically rising above all of the water that's covering the earth. And as the land rises, the water rushes off the high places into the low places. And then you have exposed layers of strata that are deep, within the geologic column. They're exposed all over the earth because of the massive amount of rapid erosion that occurred from the formation of the major mountains. That global water runoff, has removed all of that geologic strata. Alright, we're here at the Collinsville Lake Trails, walking up to the water. This entire area, a lot of it, is overlaid with a geologic layer of limestone. It stretches all across Oklahoma, probably a majority of it. They say that the surface rock of Oklahoma, most of it, unless you're up at the Panhandle, is from the Carboniferous era. So when oxygen was twice as much as oxygen in the atmosphere was twice as high as it is today, and the insects were growing to be huge. Of course, by natural erosion, of the water, it has scoured the upper layers, and some of those are still intact up in the Panhandle. The history of Collinsville begins with an abundant supply of sulfur and coal. It was laying near the surface, which attracted 1,500 to 2,000 miners. Oil and coal, gas production, and zinc smelting boomed briefly during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and the local population swelled to around 8,000 people. The upper Panhandle of Oklahoma contains the uppermost geologic strata, and the uppermost strata containing the giant land-dwelling, what they would consider to be prehistoric mammals, the giant beavers, mastodons, etc., the topmost layers on the column. And that is why Oklahoma's highest point is in the Panhandle. So if you look on the column, these are the uppermost layers, and they're listed here. Each color represents a different, what they would consider period of time, but it's just a upper or lower layer of strata. This red area here is the geographical location we're looking at, which is Collinsville, and as I discussed in the intro, the area had layers of coal exposed just on the surface, and so these are what would be considered the major commercial coal belts of Oklahoma and non-commercial coal-bearing regions in the yellow. The textbook geology and explanation for the origin of Oklahoma basically is that since the topmost layers were formed 1 million years ago, since that time, over the course of 1 million years, erosion has scoured the land, up until about 10,000 years ago, when the ice caps retreated, the end of the last ice age, they would say, and so that rose the sea levels and caused massive erosion across Oklahoma, which would originally up in the Panhandle. It would expose all of those topmost layers, leaving only the Jurassic and the Triassic and the Panhandle. Okay, and then that's going to be scoured off since then. Okay, so over the course of about 10,000 years, the Jurassic and Triassic layers and even the Permian are scoured off, leaving only the Mississippian and the Carboniferous exposed in the east, which is why you have exposed coal laying everywhere in Collinsville, Oklahoma, in that region where the major commercial coal belts are today in Oklahoma. The first 100 feet or so of geologic strata is going to be from strata that was deposited on ancient ocean floors before the evolution of reptiles or mammals. So insects primarily, the fish and the major marine life body plants have already evolved. And so ancient swamps, basically they get buried over millions of years, and they are converted into coal, because that's what coal is, just vegetation that has been compressed and converted by heat and pressure into coal. And the same with oil. Oil is just marine life that's been piled up into a massive mat, I guess, and then it's been overlaid with geologic strata, mud and rock, and then it converts all of those marine life that died. Their remains were quickly buried, and then tons of sediment overlaying them squished them into oil. Because Oklahoma geology, anywhere you walk on the surface of Oklahoma is basically going to be on top of either Permian or Pennsylvanian strata, which is where you find giant insects. So this is a landmass that was composed of an ecosystem consisting of insects, primarily amphibians that live very close to the water, so huge swampy areas. The earth today is over 80% in water. And before the flood, it would have been mostly landmass. So if you think about how much land there actually was as compared to today, which is over 80% more available landmass, what the flood did was basically shuffled all that up, scoured the pre-flood mountains and buried the world in dirt and mud from the bottoms of the oceans upward. Think about the fact that plants, and they still grow through this stuff today. Okay, the soil that is in it. So you think about before the flood, vast expanses of one different kind of mineral that grows different kinds of plants in one area. And then you go to another area, higher upland. You have the lowlands, you have the midlands, and you have the highlands. These are all have their own patterns of, different mud and soil that would be available to grow different ecosystems and support different life forms. So, the earth that I'm walking on right now, all these geologic layers that are directly under my feet, were just at one time vast expanses that stretched out for a lot longer distance than they do today. And it's all been basically piled up, and so it's been condensed. So the total surface area has been dramatically reduced as a result of the flood, catastrophically crumbling, and piling up the strata. All of the landmass that was available before the flood was piled up into what we see today. Now, this right here is coal. You could burn that. We'll try it later, maybe. Because this area is known for coal. Back in the early days, it actually come to places like that and find coal just laying around everywhere on the surface. Some more up here. It's a chunk of coal there, ladies and gentlemen. It's just, vegetation, trees, plants that have been compressed by the overlaying burden of heat or strata, and because of that pressure, just gravity basically uses heat to convert all of those plants and vegetation into coal. And the same with oil, except oil is marine organisms that are alive that have been squished and converted into oil. There's a lot of it laying around here. So you can see how these layers right here, there's many layers which very much resemble those of Mount St. Helens, recently established layers from a mud flow that occurred after the volcanic eruption. These little layers like this have been tilted. So when they were originally flat, some probably whenever they made the lake or whatever, and all this water rapidly rushed in the area, it would have tilted some of these layers. It's May right now. Things are starting to really blossom. This is a mini pine tree, so this really shows you, it's a great example of the rapid growth rate of, vegetated areas. In just 5 or 6 years, you can get a whole forest filled with these. If there wasn't any forest already in the area, because once you plant a tree, it's going to obviously absorb a lot of the nutrients and stuff out of the soil. So there's a limit on how many trees you can grow in one area. But once they begin to die, new ones then rapidly replace them. This rock right here, as opposed to the ones I was showing you, does not break very easily. So it's definitely not a loose compaction of large minerals and grains. This is a lot of tiny minerals that have been tightly condensed and solidified. Probably silica would be the cementing agent, but these are very hard and hard to break. This is what's on the inside. So obvious crystallization happening there. There's a place we should go to in Spavinal Creek. It's supposed to have granitic basement rock that's exposed.
Yeah.
So
I know out by where my girlfriend lives, by Skytook Lake, there's trails like this.
Yeah. But stuff like this, if you look at the whole, like I said, it was all once one layer, right? Or multiple layers stacked on another neatly. And then erosion cut through it. So think about where the bottom of that goes. The very bottom. You follow me?
Yeah.
So you take where we are right now, and then just keep digging down until you get to the bottom of these layers and how low that is. Mm-hmm. Down to the granite, what is considered the basement rock, of which all of this sediment sits upon. There's a place in Oklahoma, Spavinal Creek, one of the largest stretches of granite. So we'd be on the lowest, almost at the low of the geologic column. So we should go there. Like, I don't know when though. Now let's just head back. Where's the largest insect and the largest fossilized insect ever discovered in America?
Those big, they look like giant centipedes, millipedes up here.
Right. Yeah, you've seen those.
Yeah.
Alright, you know where the largest of them have been found?
Somewhere here in America.
Right here in Oklahoma.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. Some dinosaurs being found.
Dinosaurs, yeah. They're actually up in the Panhandle region. So that's like, again, if you look at a geologic column, high up in the strata. Whereas where we're at right here is like insect region, so very low. If we went over to Spavinal to the exposed granite, dude, we'd be at the lowest. Anything lower than that doesn't even have fossils in it.
How far is Spavinal?
Like an hour and 30 minutes or something.
That isn't even that far considering, you know.
And then we could go back up to Arbuckle Mountains, which are in the Panhandle. And there's like a lot of stuff up there because that's where they find the dinosaurs.
I'd like to go hike up in the Ozarks sometime.
Down at the southeast you have Cretaceous, which is even above the Jurassic and Triassic. To the west you have the Permian layers, which are directly above the Mississippian layers on the east. So according to conventional theories, deep time has carved out the middle of Oklahoma and even down in the southwest, you have layers of the Cambrian and even Precambrian granitic bedrock exposed in the dotted red section.
Bottom of the geologic column, the Cambrian, and yeah, so this is like before the flood, what you would find underneath all the topsoil at the bottom of the ocean floor, this granite rock right here. So these are supposed to be granitic bedrock, either 3.5 billion years ago when the Earth began to form life, or before the global flood totally annihilated everything living in that ancient ocean ecosystem. And so it was all uplifted, shuffled up, deposited into layers, and then by tectonic plates uplifted, and then since about 3,500 years ago eroded, and so the sides of the strata are now exposed.
Yeah.
These massive rocks came from a complete, set of strata, eroded like all of this. So these are transported from many miles away probably. But the strata itself stretches across multiple continents. Just starting in this area, goes for many miles and miles all around Oklahoma. The lake again was made by man, but this was in fact a place where water would run through, which is obvious by all that, because that wasn't caused by this man-made river. I suspect the water level in this region used to be much higher, which is why that rock bluff even exists. Okay, so it's all dammed up now and the water level is much lower, whereas if you just let the water flow through the region, it probably builds up high above those hills. It eroded all of that strata there and brought all of this. So this is made of the same strata as that, or material. Okay, so gravel, sand, silt. So I guess if you go back to where the initial water runoff is starting, that's where all of the strata, the pieces of the strata actually come from many miles away. So the water, this is the water flow today, whereas maybe 1,000 years after the flood, after the ice caps melt significantly, water would run through this region at a very rapid rate, take away all the undisturbed layers of strata, transport them down here, and then it would leave exposed rock bluffs like this.
All these came from up there at some point or another in time.
So if you chip away the rock, look how white it is on the inside. That is definitely some limestone. Okay, and that's typical of Oklahoma. So that's, limestone and stuff. can be in the same region as oceanic life. So you have, you know, grains and minerals of the granite rock, which are clustered together into a layer, and then they solidify into, I guess, rocks that are more similar to the ones we were looking at before. But these right here, this is some kind of, you know, chalk. So tiny single-celled organic, you know, single-celled organisms and all of their dead bodies and their waste deposits onto the ocean floor, and then it was later uplifted, introduced to the elements, solidified. And super white. But subjected under extreme temperatures. All the overlaying sediment that would be on top of it, like that, and much more that would be on top of that before it was all eroded away. Because up in the panhandle, you're in the Jurassic, and then, you know, even some mammals, I believe, were found up in the panhandle. So very high up in the geologic strata. This is the lowest that you can possibly get. So anything that was down here that was established into a layer would have undergone extreme temperatures just by the weight of the overlaying sediment. And so recrystallization of grounded up granite, and then petrification of the ancient single-celled organism remains would make this limestone that you see here. It is subjected to those temperatures, and so that actually speeds up the petrification process, turning it into rock. This rock here, metamorphic, so you can see different kinds of minerals have come together. They've been smashed, and then by subjected to heat and pressure have been molded together and later turned to stone, as all the layers. So here you can get a nice picture of how the strata was actually laid down. Down there at the end, at the very bottom, you can see the white layer. That's the chalk, the limestone. The marine organisms, they'd be living on the surface of the ocean floor. Okay, so that comes in first, and then on top of that is everything that's surrounding it, like the continental shelf. Okay, so you go out into the shoreline and go lower and lower. There's an entire ecosystem just built on the shallow oceans, and so the soil and everything, that part gets covered up. And then the higher you go, the more animals that you encounter. Okay, the lower that you go, the darker this material becomes. You go down even further and you'll reach, you know, the granite. Sedimentary rock, all that sets on top of granite rock.
They used to get sparks like that.
Oh wow. And now we can see the inside. Looks definitely like some limestone agents in there. The surrounding is all.
Let's see if I can get more into it. Now you see the true colors.
Yep. So it's like what made that soft outer edge, you know?
It's just years of aging and being pressed and conformed. And then what makes them round is just pressure over time.
Yeah.
Because there's a shelf, if you look right there, that big dirt spot that looks like it's like something fell over. That was probably part of the rock at some point, and it finally got so weak it just collapsed under its own weight.
Yeah. Found some shells.
It'd be shellfish not to share them.
Yes. Marine life, you know, marine soil, shoreline, coastline, swampy areas, you know, provide a abundant variety of minerals.
Fresh water. Like that. Survive, you could.
There we are. So it's basically the same thing as gravel, it looks like, except it's not like ground to pieces.
Dude, that's like a good diving spot if the water was even deep enough like that.
I think that the over there is like going towards the end of the lake, actually, where it develops into a stream.
Yeah, it looks like if we follow the trail, it's going to go back up over that way.
That's probably where we should go.
Yeah.
Because less rocks will be that way, actually.
Yeah.
So it's like,
when I climbed on that log, or that tree, that's when I spotted the platform.
but actually, if you look at the history of places like these, because these are natural, they're not natural lakes.
Yeah, all this looks like it's been dug out.
It's man-made.
Mm-hmm.
So, not necessarily dug out, but when this was like the original location here, before the water, was just rock bluffs. And that's what you look at, like before, history of Ulugal, for instance, before the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that it was just like, around here was like farming land. And then places like this would just be a rock bluff, so just like a big low spot. It's basically a small mountain. So yeah, there's one end of the lake right there. If you looked at this from the sky, like any other normal ending for a lake. The stream is totally cut off, but when water flows, it comes through there. You can see, you know, because it's all layers, you know, it was all a part of one unit, you know, something is coming through here and toward all that, and it's just a natural process of the water. The lake is man-made, but a great amount of water had to come through here before the lake was put in to cause all of this erosion. And so they just capitalized on the natural low place that it created, filled it in with water, and I have like a dam or whatever the purpose is for them making the lakes. But yeah. This is why catastrophism explains geology. You could accomplish it by slow processes, but even with millions of years, you have major extinctions, tectonic plate uplift, major flooding. So you could stretch it out over a long period of time, but there's no need to do that.
Chris, look. You can't see me, I'm camouflaged.
I know, what's up with like those people like that work in the clerical positions in military offices? It's like they're dressed in camouflage, but everybody can see you, man. You're in an office. It makes more sense if you had a fax machine on your head.
Outfit.